Good morning. Today we are going to study about the aggregate manufacturing. Okay. So it basically consists of two topics. First one that is natural aggregate and second one is recycled aggregate. First of all, I will tell you about what is mechanization. Mechanization is a process of changing of work largely or exclusively by hand or with the animal to doing that work with the machinery. That means the work in a large quantity is done by mainly animals or by hands is done with the machinery to get the efficiency and the completion on time. A project comprises various activities of the diverse nature. Execution of each activity should be planned meticulously to ensure the sequential execution in time. That means all the activities which are started need to be completed on time and on in sequence. There is no alternative to adopting mechanized construction method to achieve more in less time. Once the decision of the deployment of the construction equipment is taken, required construction equipment needed to be identified. That means the for the execution of any type of work, if it is required any equipment, then the equipment should to be identified. That means the availability of the equipment should be there. The construction projects are divided into two types. First one that is linear project and second one is the fast track project. The linear project consists of the planning, the concept, the design, the procurement and the construction, and afterwards the further work has been executed. In the fast track project, the designing and the construction work both are in process. On the fast track project, the job design and the construction being almost simultaneously. The construction work is started even when the design engineers are working on the foundation of the structure. That means both the work can be run parallelly, that is the designing work as well as the construction work. This happens when the completion of the work is in time is considered as a synchronized and competitive bidding is not essential. So let me tell you about what is aggregate manufacturing. The aggregate manufacturing mainly consists of various processes from the extraction of the material to the sand preparation. The various operations are performed during the manufacturing of the aggregate like quarrying, crushing, segregation, etc. For the execution of these works, the various equipments are required. The aggregate production mainly consists of extraction, crushing, screening, sand production, segregation, stockpiling, handling, degradation, and retrieval. It is a general process or general flow chart which shows that the raw material is being extracted by the means of the trucks. It has been transported to the primary crusher where the materials are disintegrated into the smaller pieces. If there is any material which is left which is not break into the two or three pieces, then it is sent to the secondary crusher. After the secondary crusher, the materials are collected in a search pile, then separated. If somehow some of the few materials which are left to deteriorate in or to break into the pieces, then it is sent to the tertiary crusher. Otherwise the material which is came from the secondary crusher is being segregated on the basis of the size of the particles, and then the separated materials are transferred to the market for the selling. Basically the extraction process of the material is done by quarrying from the mountains and the rocks. That means the hard rock material, the aggregates are being extracted from these hard rock materials. The process of extraction of the suitable stones from their natural rock beds or the layers is commonly called as a quarrying of a stone. That means the process by which the rock by which the materials or the stones are extracted out from these natural rock beds or the layers is known as quarrying of a stone. It can be said that the quarrying is an operation carried out entirely on the surface. That means all the operations are carried out on the surface of the rock beds or the mountain. Depending upon the nature and the surface of the rocks and the purpose for which the stones are needed, quarrying is done by excavating, wedging, heating, and blasting. For the execution of quarrying work, it mainly depends on the site and the following factors. The first factor is the availability of sufficient quantity of the stone at desired quality. That means the place at which the quarrying process is going to be started, needed to have that quality of material or that quality of rocks in it. Second point, that is the proper transportation facility. Definitely, after the quarried material needed to be transported from the quarry site to the plant where the separation or the segregation of the material can be done. The third one, the cheap local labor should be available. That means the availability of local labor near the site is very important so that the work can be executed on time. The problem associated with the drainage of the rainwater. Definitely, if there is no proper drainage of rainwater, then the water is collected in the pits or in the holes where the rocks are going to be collected. Next one, the location of the important and the permanent structure in the vicinity. That means if there is an structure or permanent structure located at the site, that the site should be shifted from that place. Then the site from the dumping refuge. That means the location where the waste material needed to be dumped. Then the querying tools are as wedge, pen, hammer, dipper, scraping spoon, tamping bar, priming needle, jumper, borer, claying iron, and the crowbar. These are the material which are used in querying. So, the crushing, the first step of processing being after the extraction of material from the quarry pit, it is called as the crushing. That it involves are common with the recycled aggregate, clay, other manufacturing aggregate. The first stage in the most operation is the reduction and sizing of the crushing. That means the material which is collected from the quarrying site is needed to be crushed or reduced inside so that it can be converted into the usable form. Some of the operations, however, provided a step prior to the crushing called scalping. That means the some in the initial stage, the material which are disintegrated into the small pieces or the clay or the rocks are initially separate out so that it is called as scalping. Scalping most often used to divert the fineness at the jaws primer crusher in order to improve the crusher efficiency. That means the loose material, the soils and the clay are needed to be separated out before it is fed into the primary crusher. In this way, the very coarse portion is crushed and the recombined with the portion of the crusher runs material before further processing. That means the material which is needed to be crushed is having a very low in passage. So, because the waste material, the loose material are separated at the initial level. If a deleterious or the finest problem exists in the finer fraction of the crusher run material, that the fall through of the scalping operation may be totally or the partially diverted or wasted or may be made into the product of lesser quality. That means if these waste material or these soil or the clay material are fed into the crusher, that means the product which we are getting after the output having the lesser quality. In the stone quarries, in a very bony gravel pits, a large material usually is reduced in a size by either a jaw or a crateri crusher. Both the types are compression crusher. That means the machine and the crusher are compressing the material to disintegrate into the pieces. Although economical, they have the tendency to create thin, elongate particles. Particle shape sometimes may be problem for the producer of hot mix asphalt. That means if we are using in an asphalt or wrapping, the material is not wrapping properly due to the larger in size. This is the picture of a jaw crusher. In between this, the from here, the material enters into the it, and due to these the compression members, the material is placed here, then the force is applied. The jaws of both the panels crush the material and disintegrate into the 2-3 pieces. After the primary crushing, the reduction, the resulting aggregate generally is placed in a large search pile where this aggregate may be fed into the secondary portion. That means the after the jaw crusher, the materials are collected at a place is known as search pile. The variation at the point may affect both the minerals quality and the gradation. If the need ever arise to consume the entire pile, care is taken to thoroughly mix the older material a little at a time of with the fresh product to make the search as uniform as possible as the aggregate is being pushed into the tunnel. That means while using the fresh material, somehow older material is mixed through it to get a uniform aggregate material. Now, the secondary and the tertiary crusher. The secondary and the tertiary crushing is performed when the material is disintegrated into the pieces is not up to the requirement of the size after the primary crushing, then the secondary and the tertiary crushing is done. If it is necessary, the final steps is reducing the material into the desired product size. Historically, cone or the roller crushers were the most common choice of the crusher. That means the cone crusher and the roller crusher. But in the recent years, impact crusher are most using in widely. The cone crusher are the compression types, simply crushes the aggregate between the oscillating cone and the crusher wall. This is an oscillating cone and these are the crusher walls. In between, the cone is oscillating up and down so that the materials enters in it is inserted or the fitted in between, and due to the oscillating motion of the cone, the material or the aggregate or the particles which are break into the smaller pieces. The clearance setting on this equipment are required to check the maintenance as part of standard operating procedures. The cone crusher yields of somewhat elongate or the silvery particles shape. This may be minimized, however, by choke feeding to the crusher. That means if somehow the particle is jammed between them, then the choke is fed into the crusher so that the material stucking can be minimized. This technique will also make the shape and size of material uniform, by which the material which are somehow get converted into the powdery form or in the very fine particles, that by adding the choke, the uniformity of the size particle can be maintained easily. This is the picture of impact crusher. Impact crusher are used in primary, secondary and tertiary crusher. Despite having a somewhat higher operating cost than the other crushers, they tend to produce the more uniform particle size. That means the impact crushers having high cost of operating, but the product we get having a uniform particle size. So it having both advantage and disadvantage. Impact crusher usually will benefit the aggregate better than the compression crusher and there may generate the uniform particles. Then the screening. Screening is another technique to control both the quality and the gradation of the aggregate product. That means by using the screening, the particle size, the quality of the material, the gradation, we get a uniform product output. This step may occur between the crushing so that an opportunity exists to recreate the same size downstream if needed to create a product. The screen out lower quality material may be used for the lower quality product or the wasted if it is of no use. The rinse screen is commonly used by the processing that the material over the screen that retains all of the product, the clay deteriorates fineness and may be rinsed away to make the product acceptable. That means here, the loose material, the clay and the sands or the gravels or the finest material are mixed with the moisture and that can be evenly separate out or rinse off from the final product. This is the best technique for the gradation control of screening. The screening may be done or the wet or the dry, depending on the type of aggregate being processed and the degree of the consistency required for each product. That means it can be done in both the ways, wet or dry. But depending on the aggregate, that means if the aggregate is in pure form, it doesn't contain any kind of impurity, then the dry process can be adopted. If the material is wrapped up around by the clay, soil, loose material, then it requires the wet process so that the loose material can be vanished off by or rinse off by the sprayer of water. The dry screening is slightly misnomer because the material passing over the screen text is wet, ranging from slightly damp to very wet, depending on the conditions such as rain or the subsurface moisture. Non-washed screening is more accurate description of the screening process. So here we have discussed about the aggregate manufacturing process, the crushing process, the segregation, or all over about how can we get the even size of particle or material. So we will continue in the next class.